Yeah, hey Sean, I'm really glad to see you, and I'm glad that you agreed
Oh,
to have coffee together today.
yeah, it's great. The flight was fantastic. 4,500. No, what am I talking about? 5,500 miles to Denver, isn't it? And you wouldn't think it. I look so incredibly relaxed. It's fantastic. So happy coffee time.
The same to you, sir. Okay,
Ah, cool. Oh, indeed.
go, go. Okay, Sean, you and I have been, when we met earlier in the week, we were discussing what we wanted to talk about again when we got together. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things we were discussing was our 20 and Gone show and our audience. I suggested that we hold off the comments and addressing them to the end of the show because it was very difficult to do that and monitor our conversation.
Mm.
My question to you is, are you okay with that today? How are you feeling about, our audience? Because we certainly don't want to let them think that we don't care about them.
You mean how am I feeling about all those people that might be eavesdropping on our private conversation in the coffee shop, Sandra? Um, no, in all seriousness, of course we don't. We obviously love and appreciate everybody, and it is 20 minutes. So I think we discussed, didn't we, Sandra, with the audience last week that we would look at the comments at the end and see how they segued into what we've been talking about earlier. Is that what we were talking about? Or have I missed something?
Nope, you're you're absolutely online. That being said, if we're both in agreement, then we're going to address comments at the end, if in fact there are any, and if there are not, that's fine too. So, Sean, we were talking earlier that we wanted to talk today about our story, our personal stories. I had read some things recently and watched a couple of videos where it said our story is very important for us to tell.
Hmm.
And I had a hard time when I first got into the web, social media, and real life. That's a little bit different. In a sense, we do tell our story more openly there. But the word story was really confusing to me because I said, how in the world? I'm not a novelist. I don't write
Okay.
books. I'm
Mm.
not really probably very good at writing. So how do I make that easy for me, and what is my story? So, Sean, I need your help today. Let's go through this and let you and I discuss it together and see what we both think about what our story is.
Yeah, I mean, we did sort of touch on this earlier, didn't we, in that earlier conversation? And um, there were a couple of threads that we were talking about as to what was meant by story, because sometimes people get hung up by the use of the word story. So just remind me, Sandra, what context were you talking about? Were you talking about personally, or were you talking about in the context of business, or just more generally?
Sean, you're being way too formal for me with this coffee today.
I
I feel
know, I know. I tell you
I
what,
feel
I
like
don't.
you are on camera.
Well, you know what? I'm not on camera, and I should really thank you for these flowers, by the way, which
Wait,
arrived the
what?
other day.
Oh, they're
Great, great,
beautiful.
great Valentine's gift. Actually, before we get, I also got you something, so thank you.
How
There's
sweet.
there are your
Cadbury.
chocolates. So there we go, there we go. Yeah, you're right. I've been snorting too much coffee, haven't I? And I got excessively formal, which is not that unusual for a Brit, but there we go. So story, yeah. Do you know what? Story's quite an interesting thing, isn't it? For me, I guess story is how do I want to represent myself? So you know what? You and I are good friends, and I'll share elements of myself that I might not share more generally. And if it was my business, the parts of my story I would share would certainly have me in there because I believe in being real, but they would probably be a slightly different version of me. And you're right, I don't want to get too formal here, but that's my beginning thought of story. I've also got feelings around story in terms of legacy, story in terms of adding value, and that's not being pompous, but what can I share that may be helpful in terms of my experiences with people who are going through a similar set of decisions or projects. So there's a whole load of stuff. I'm not sure I can compress it easily, Sandra, unless I have another cappuccino, in which case I might be fine.
Well, you know, one of the things that I had watched on a video where they were talking about how the story is actually an experience.
Mm-hmm.
For me, if I look at it like that, it simplifies it a little bit more, because I've been trying always to make it this massive thing, I guess. And when I looked at it like that, it was like, okay, so how many experiences do we have in life? I mean, do you feel that when you share yourself on anything that you're sharing a story, or are you just sharing a subject?
Oh, I see where you're going. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I think there's something we've not covered yet, which is story in terms of, at the risk of sounding a bit formal, story in terms of the platform that I'm on. So, for example, you know, and a lot of people might know that I'm really into movies. I'm not necessarily saying they're the best movies in the world, but I love my movie entertainment. And I could probably relay the story of Star Wars. I love sci-fi, science fiction. I love that sort of fantasy type thing. But I could probably relay the Star Wars story on Vine with 10 seconds of video, and on a Google Hangout lasting for 2.5 hours, or whatever the maximum of a Google Hangout is. But would that story be the same? It would obviously be condensed and tweaked to fit the particular platform it was on. So I guess for me, I'm always kind of mindful. You asked me the question, are we just sharing, well, to paraphrase, are we just sharing stuff, or are we sharing the story and the experience? I'd like to think some of what I do, not all of what I do to be fair, but some of what I do is sharing my story. But I also will adjust that a little bit. And I'm being a bit pretentious, actually, because to be honest, not everything I share is brilliant. I don't think anyone always shares brilliant stuff. Sometimes it's just noise, if I'm honest. But yeah, do you know what, Sandra? I could have another cup of coffee, because I think I've totally lost the plot.
Okay, let me go back to an example then. Something that, you know, we kind of touched on a little bit when we were talking about this earlier, is that let's say that we're talking about a business. You know, one of the things that came out of our conversation was that, let's take when you start a business, how did you do that? That's a story. When you got your first desk, your first chairs, your first phones, your furniture for your business, how did that come about? How did you feel? How did that make you? You know, were there challenges with it? That kind of thing. That's a story. Then let's go back to our life. You know, when people say your life story, somehow my impression was I had to start at the beginning and end at the end, and I don't think I'm at the end yet, so it's, you know, not a good thing to go to that part. But it was easier than if I thought about it. As an example, I recently did a post about some pink gloves with some zebra cuffs. They were rubber gloves for cleaning. And it was about the experience of being an entrepreneur. That post got a lot of traction because people could empathize with it, I guess. I don't know. But it wasn't anything earth-shattering. It was just an experience that I had. I realized one day that here I am at a computer, here I am doing these things on social media, but hey, guess what? I got to clean the windows, I got to vacuum the floor, I got to do the bathroom, etc. And that's what an entrepreneur does, and people, I guess, could relate to that. That's a story. When you are telling your story, do you share like that? I mean, has that been difficult for you? Or do you feel like that comes naturally? Because for me, it didn't come naturally. And still probably doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. I don't know how to answer that, because I'm not sure that I would always share my story in that way on the platforms that people might more commonly see me. But if you're asking me if it's a good thing to do, I think it's a good thing to do. Because in terms of the way people learn, my belief is we learn through a mixture of styles, and we're all somewhat different in those mixtures. And for some of us, we're much more process orientated, and we like to see the nuts and bolts and the flow charts of how to do something. But for someone like me, if I was to receive your story as to how you set the business up, that would help me build a vision that would then allow me to fit all the other pieces together, if you follow me. So I'm a big advocate of the value of stories, because let's face it, when we were, you know, basic cavemen, sitting around campfires. That's how things were communicated to the tribe, in stories. And I think as human beings, we've still got that. We've still got that requirement. So stories seem to very quickly resonate with people if they're done well, and you can compress a lot into a story. But let's use the word story to embrace content, non-fiction. We're not talking about fiction here necessarily. Do I always use that style? No, I don't, because I might just share a quote and an image, or I might just share a screenshot, or I might just share a bit of video. If it's video, I probably do try and tell a story, to be fair.
Okay, so if we were going to turn our conversation that we're having here over a cup of coffee into a story, how would you start off with that? I mean, give me an example.
Well, I would give a context personally. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, by the way. This is just the way I might do it. So I might just give a flavor as to why we got talking about storytelling in the first place, which is what you did in fairness. So then people have arrived at the story knowing what is probably likely to unfold. I might, without sounding pretentious, I might try and weave some different threads through that story to make it more engaging. So I don't know quite what that would look like, but you know, depending on how much time I had, I could tell a little bit of the story and then relate it to something factual, so people could get that and then move on a little bit more with the story. Or I might play around with the order and the sequence of the story. We all know films that sort of start in the middle when the characters are middle-aged and then go back to when the characters were young, and you get the backstory, and that sort of sometimes works really, really well. So if I was telling the story about this conversation, I might start strangely towards the end. You know, I might say, and when we'd done this, the results we got were X, Y, and Z, but here's what we actually did, and then tell the story. Who knows? But I think keeping it fresh and exciting and changing the perspective every so often is a good way to do it, so that people's minds are continually engaged. Now you're looking puzzled, so have I told a story that makes you think, Sean, what are you talking about? Or is that a reasonable story, Sandra?
No, I think it's good. You know, the one thing I love about when you and I talk is that it helps us both think and look at things in a different way. One of the things we were talking about earlier, and I've thought about it a lot since then, is that depending on the story, it also depends on the person that's reading it. For instance, the one that I did with the gloves, you know, a lot of people like that, and they really were able to associate their story with it, but some may have been really turned off because if they were in the middle of a business that was not fulfilling, and maybe they didn't want to do windows, maybe they didn't want to clean bathrooms, and then now all of a sudden they're reminded that, yeah, that's what they're doing by being an entrepreneur, it may have turned them off. And so I guess the other side of it is, how much do we put, when we think about our story, do we have to think a lot about the end person, or do we just go for it and tell the story from our perspective and know that, you know, we're reaching the audience that's ready to receive it at that time?
I would always go with the second one, because I think, you know, you're absolutely right. People will come to any story, whether it's a film. We talked a little bit about the interpretation of a famous photograph and how some people have totally gotten wrong who was the guilty party in the photograph, because the photograph hadn't zoomed out and showed the full picture. My point being that people will always come to a story or an experience with their own beliefs and values and filters and experiences, and they'll colour that story with those. But it's not our role to try and second guess that, I don't think. Otherwise, you know, we'll be watering down or diluting or changing the story in a manipulative way to suit what we think we ought to be saying. Far better to tell the story as honestly and truthfully as we can, whether that be our own personal story or the story of our business. And for those that it resonates with, absolutely fantastic. For those it doesn't, it doesn't. That's the way of the world, isn't it? But
oh wow, I just thought of something.
oh,
Yeah, well, we one
we
of the
run out
things.
of time.
Yeah, well, we only have a short time, but think about it. You said something once to me that was really true, and I really did thunk on it, and that was that we also have the ability
Just the
to
ones.
write, because if I'm involved with you in conversation where our lives are, involved, however, together at times, I have the ability then to write stories about your life too, the way I perceive what's going on. Maybe not, in the personal manner, but for instance, I could write about your plant. I could say different things about that. I could make a story about your plant and about your window in your room when you're on camera and everything. And you brought up a good analogy, and you have 2 minutes to tell it about, go over that again for me about your neighbor, how that was.
Yeah. It's just, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about how we should write our stories. You've just taken the flip side. People will always make interpretations of our own stories, won't they? And I do. I'll look at someone in a shop. I'm a great people watcher. I might be sitting in a cafe having a coffee, and I'll just be looking out the big glass window as I have a cookie and have a cappuccino. And I might be making up any manner of things about those people. I see some woman come out of a store and she's looking happy, and I'll fabricate the fact she's 38 years old, she's single because I quite like her, so she's got to be single. And she works in a bank, etc., etc. And it could be a million miles away. But that's a jokey example of what you sometimes see, where people can create the most empowering or destructive stories about others. Just on the basis of speculation and a little bit of evidence. And the neighbours you were referring to, luckily for me, they're elderly neighbours who are very supportive. But I know through visiting them and spending time with them that they probably spend most of their time, as they look out through their windows, as their curtains twitch and they're watching people, manufacturing any amount of stories about other people. Why is that? So we've got. I got the message. Okay, so to finish up on that one, I guess when we tell our stories, just to wrap up on that, the only thing we can do is be true and tell our story in the best possible way, because whether it be an empowering or disempowering stance, we'll always have other people potentially interpreting our stories with their own beliefs and filters. That's inevitable. But for us, the only thing we can do is be true to our story.
You did a good job of clarifying some things there, Sean, and I really like that. One of the things that I'm going to read, before you and I got together, I was trying to put down my thoughts in writing a little bit, because I was trying to tell my story to myself. That's really kind of weird, isn't it? But I said, my life story has a supporting cast of others around me and a few unpaid extras. And what you were just now talking about with the people that don't leave their home very often, that is their story, though. And the people outside are, they're supporting members of their cast, and then they have a few extras that aren't paid that, come in and out, like the mailman or whatever, and they're making up their own stories. So I shouldn't say making it up, but that's the way they perceive it. So it definitely is our story, the way we perceive it, and quite possibly we have an obligation to share it the way we perceive it, and to not try to fake it and make it or whatever, but just tell our story
absolutely.
So that we can help others. And I think that helped. I'm going to certainly look at my experiences. I have many, and I know you do too. So maybe this next week we can encourage each other to write a few stories and see what kind of response we get. It would be kind of interesting, don't you think, Sean?
Absolutely. I totally agree, Sandra.
Okay, sir. Well, you know what? I've got to get on my way because I got to go make some stories.
I've got a flight to catch, Sandra, back to the UK. So I'll see you soon.
Okay. Thanks. It was nice getting together.
And you too. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye. Okay, Sean. We're still live because we have to look and see it. See if there's.
I think we're still live, Sandra.
We're gonna go check out.
We were doing really well.
Hey, listen, guys.
We were doing really well until then.
I know, for any of you out there now, we're just now turning on to see comments because we did not look at them before, and this is our time to address them. And I hope you can stay for a few minutes more. But do you have your stream on, Sean?
I did, and then I got so thoroughly confused. It must have followed Oscar-winning performance.
Okay, well, I do know. I see Tanya. I see Tanya.
Okay,
I see Dave
Tanya.
Moore,
Hello, Tanya.
and right now those are the comments. So let's start addressing. And Tanya says, "Are only wrong conclusions 100% conclusive?" No, Tanya. We're so confused on that issue. What the heck?
Actually, I can't see any comments. You're going to have to read them and pin them, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Mine are not coming up.
Okay, well, this is a good one, Sean. It says here, Tanya, looking outside Sean Maughn's window, looks like he moved, or moved mountains.
Well, yeah, you could say that. I did have a story. I don't know if I... Oh, let me... Yeah, shall I? I won't share the bird story, or should I? No, I won't.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to do that. Now, see, look, that's a terrible technique, isn't it? Now you throw it out there and you take it back.
Listen, everyone. Sean has a bird in the window, and he's going to tell his bird story.
Okay, I'm going to tell a bird story. I've got to find the image very, very quickly, if I can. Imagine this. I know with my youthful looks, it's hard to imagine that I was any younger at one point, but indeed I was. And I'll just find the image.
You have the wrong
Sandra's laughing because she knows. Yeah, God knows where the hell it is. Okay, there is an image. There is an image.
While you're doing that, while you're looking for it, I got to put up what Tanya said again. This is too funny. Tanya said there's a streaker running amok the fields outside Sean Maughn's window. Now that's the story.
Actually, that was no. I'm not going to go there.
That was good, Tanya. You did a wonderful job. And Dave said, Dave Moore, Thank you for stopping in, Dave. I can't tell you my life story as I haven't finished living it yet, and we definitely.
I agree. That one. We did discuss that. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And one of the other iterations of story that we discussed in the green room previously, or when we were having our pre-coffee would be a better way of putting it, was the fact that for me, story is also about legacy. And you know, I'm quite influenced by, I'm a bit of an arty-farty in real life. I pretend to dabble in marketing, but, you know, I love the cinema, I love art and literature. And those people that influence me have left a really powerful legacy. And like Dave says, I'm putting an interpretation, Dave, on what you said, so forgive me, I shouldn't do that. But, yeah, you know, we were talking about our stories not having ended. And I think one way for them not to end is to leave a good legacy, isn't it? Because there are artists and creators and sculptors that we still talk about today whose physical bodies have disappeared, but their legacy lives on. So that's my arty-farty little bit for today.
And Dave Moore comes back saying, using stories really works, but the story message has to be relevant to the hearer or the situation the hearer is in. That way they create the context around the story, making it component parts relevant to them, and they can see how it can be. I think Dave got it. Don't you think so? Yeah. And I know that Tanya did, you know. And then again, we work in two realms. Thanks, Dave. What really happened and story interpretation. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I will. I'm not going to share the bird story, but I will share something that fits in with interpretation. It was Dave may be familiar with this because it was an image that was thrown around the UK papers about 7 or 8 years ago, and so I'm going to ask people to imagine this if they will. But imagine an image where coming towards the camera with an expression that was a bit like this. Is a guy with an expression like this who's got studs. He's about 25, big cockatoo haircut, green, purple, and yellow, studs all over his forehead, nose ring, lips are pierced, look like this. And behind him, at an angle, you can see a UK police officer chasing him. And that UK police officer has kind of got an expression like that. And I would ask you to just think about that image for a moment and imagine to yourself what that image would convey. Sandra, what would it convey to you? I know we've done this before, so it's not fair, is it?
I have that analytical mind, as you know, Sean, and so my thought is, I don't mind about the piercings, any of that stuff. That's okay. It's the person, and I wonder. My first thought is, of course, are the police officer and the young man running together towards something, as opposed to one running after the other? And I don't know the whole story, so I can't answer that.
Okay, and the purpose of this, by the way, before we think where the hell is Sean going, is it's about perceptions and resonance in a story. And of course, photos, images can create stories as well as words, as well as dialogue. 80%, 90% of the people who saw that first image were of the view that because of the way this guy looked and he was quite young, he clearly committed a crime, and the police officer was chasing him. And that just immediately shows the prejudices and assumptions that most of us make every day. The second version of the photo showed the bit that had been cropped off. And what had been cropped off was that there was a guy in a smart suit who was further ahead of the punk, if you like, using the wrong word there, but just for the sake of description. And this person had knocked a lovely, sweet old lady to the floor and stolen the handbag. The person that up until now most of the audience had thought of as a punk had seen this happen and picked the old lady up and then was in hot pursuit. And the policeman was rushing in support of the punk. But because we hadn't seen the whole picture in the first instance, we put our own interpretations on. So it's kind of coming a little left field from what Dave was saying, where Dave was talking about stories resonating and how we make our meaning. The thing, of course, about that is we can make meanings that are positive and empowering, or we can pull in some very negative contexts and negative meanings. And I guess, again, it brings me back to the fact that we can only tell our story as best as we can. We cannot control how people interpret it, as long as we put it out in a pure form.
Let's put up
there's a gentleman I totally respect.
Do you want to read the comments?
Shall I? It's interesting that there's a similar surname there, isn't it? But because I made a complete, and I won't tell you the embarrassing story that's behind this one. But Lee, it's great to see you. And Lee's put up, I like the comment by Dave Moore, as we can't know our life story since there's a lot more of life to live, which I totally agree. So thank you very much for that, Lee.
Okay, well, Dave said, Sean, you've just described my appearance at the weekend. You know, guys, and Dave loves birds. Too bad we couldn't get that darn bird up.
No, you don't want that story.
and Tanya comes back and says, sad story, there was hummingbird outside my door, as pretty as can be, except it was a caputs. Just lying there, so sad and mysterious.
Oh.
Okay, now that's a story. See, you know, it's like, look at the emotion that brings in you. Thank you, Tanya. That was good. Mm-hmm. Okay, Sean, I think that we can wrap it up. Guys, I'm really glad you stopped by. Thanks for eavesdropping. We were going to say at the end, hey, look who's in the restaurant with us, but I forgot.
And I forgot too, so totally my fault. But yeah, there we go.
Okay, we're going to go write our stories this week, and yes. You know what? We'll see you guys next week. Hope you have a wonderful week yourself. Write some stories, send them to us, and have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. Make some good stories, guys, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.